Good afternoon, everybody. I'm your host. Once again, we're just doing our lecture series. Our lecture doesn't sound right. I don't know, but it feels like the most. I don't know. I just don't feel worthy of calling anything of my videos a lectures. Let's just call them talks. Talks sounds better. I'm an undergraduate, so I don't feel really worthy of giving myself that. And once again, if you wish to correct me or fact check me if you want to, and I encourage you to do because you are in the right to do so. And our source is once again, like I said before, it's a book called Aristotle and Xenophon on Democracy and Oligarchy. It includes constitutions that are on the subject of democracy and oligarchy. Translations or and introductions are by J.M. Moore, and it has a new foreword by Kurt A. Ruffalo. And it's a really good source. I actually used that in one of undergraduate classes. It was we did not go actually over the Constitution of Athens, so like we went over the one by the old oligarch, but it wasn't really detailed. It was like about 10 pages. It pretty much just talked about the life of Athens as at that time. And the reason it's called an old oligarch is because, well, it's actually credited as Xenophon, but it's not actually written by Xenophon, and so it's called pseudo Xenophons, or it's attributed to a person called the old oligarch, who most likely it was an oligarch who wrote this. But yes, that's besides the point. Um, this series has dragged out for quite a bit, so we need to get that done. And I think, well, let's just begin. So we left off where the 5,000 were overthrown, and the 400 were left. But the 400 after this were did not last. They lasted longer, but they were overthrown 7 years later. And yeah. But anyways, the Athenians had a chance to make peace with the Spartans at this time, but the Athenians rejected this proposal. And this was really due to the influence of this one man called Cleophon, and he suggested that the Athenians should not make peace with the Spartans unless the Spartans surrendered the cities, basically surrendering their empire that they acquired during the Peloponnesian War, and the Spartans said heck no to that. Just like Athens did not want to give up their empire when Sparta was urging them to, or the Peloponnesian League to be exact. Um, this was a mistake that the Athenians would not be able to correct, and basically, Lysander, one of the more notable Spartan figures. If you wish to read about him, you could read about him in Plutarch's The Rise and Fall of Athens, and Plutarch has a little biography, if you will. I mean, uh, it's you shouldn't call Plutarch a biographer, but that's kind of what his work has been for us for a long time. He's basically the whole entire thing about the parallel lives is to it's pretty much to show these aspects of virtue and how like certain Romans and Greeks are alike and how they're better and blah blah blah. But long story short, the Greeks usually win, but that's because Plutarch's kind of a bit biased, if we're being honest. But yes, that's besides the point. What was I saying? Yes, Lysander, brilliant Spartan, and he was probably one of the more central figures of the Peloponnesian War, because this man was a political mastermind. He was installing puppet governments all over the place wherever Sparta conquered, and this basically led to the Spartan hegemony. And so it was no surprise that after he laid Athens to a siege, that he would basically starve them out and force them to come under his terms, and this led to Lysander installing a new government. And this would be called the 30 and the 10. And this was how Lysander forcibly established peaceful terms between Sparta and Athens, and he pretty much wanted to get rid of the whole democracy thing. He just wanted them to be governed by their ancestral constitution. The Spartans are, as you know, they're a fusion of a lot of governments. Really, they have two kings. You can say they have a senate, but people aren't really too involved. They share everything. They're a bit communistic and socialistic at the same time. They're they're an interesting government, but that's besides the point. But anyways, Democrats of Athens try to preserve democracy, and the aristocrats of Athens desired an oligarchy, and anyone else who did not fit in that group just wanted the ancestral constitution. And Lysander the Spartan ends up siding with the oligarchs, and that is not surprising. And he basically overpowered the citizens of Athens and made them vote out the democracy in favor of the oligarchy. And this was pretty much voted on the proposal. There was, let me rephrase that. There was a man named Draconides of Aphenida who made the proposal for this oligarchy, which these citizens were forced to vote in, and out went democracy. And final thoughts of this section, because I believe this whole entire section that I've been reading to you up to these last 6 minutes is called "The Democracy Restored." Well, it's not called that in the book, but that's what I called it because I do my notes in that, and I like to label it. But anyways, final thoughts about this section is that the issue about democracy, the radical democracy of Athens will be that it's just not a good idea to have put too much power in the majority. That is why the checks and balance system is probably the best thing you can have in a government. But yeah, you cannot have a consensual government. So this terrified the founding fathers. They did not want this, and for obvious reasons. But anyways, yes, you should not deprive the people of any um say or um control over the government, but you have to limit it a bit. Have a little bit of discretion. But in the end, the weakness of this democracy of Athens is that it simply can always be voted out. And if you really want to talk about successful constitutions, you can argue that Sparta's constitution is far more easily, easily better than Athens. The reason is because it lasted way longer. And anyways, moving on from that section, we're moving into the 13 to 10, the meat and potatoes of this video. So yes, the 13 to 10 were established, and when these tyrants came to power, they immediately got rid of the proposals regarding the constitution. They discarded that, except for the appointment of the 500 members of the Boule and a couple of other magistrates that were elected prior to the 1,000. Also, they chosen 10 others to govern the Piraeus. The Piraeus is a port, by the way. And also, there were 11 guards for the prison and whip bearers that were assigned to the 10 attendants that were part of the 30 and the 10. And this was the way that this regime kind of controlled the city because they had a pretty adequate staff. I mean, low numbers, but it doesn't really matter as long as you really have an iron grip on the city. And yes, at first, 30 to 10, I will say, and Aristotle even says that they acted really moderately towards their citizens. But this was just a farce. They were just doing this and making people believe they were following the ancestral constitution. And until they did the following, they took down the laws of Epiotes. And if you know Epiotes, we covered him like either in the first or second video. And he's a really important figure in all of this. And they repealed the laws of Solon and got rid of the digesty of their power. The digesty, I believe, it's something to do with the courts, but that's besides the point. I'm pretty sure we went over that in the first video because I believe that's the term that we covered. And in response to this, the 30 and the 10 basically responded to these criticisms that they were just fixing the Constitution and removing anything that was vague. They did not want to draw up attention, obviously. They also had other reforms, but that's besides the point. And yes, by tightening their grip, they began acting freely as tyrants. This regime also killed others for their great wealth, good reputation, or those who came from good families. This was basically just to eliminate any potential threats to the regime, and also they just want to get their hands on the property of their victims. And Aristotle says that there were at least 1,500 murders. It's an approximation, there might have been more, or there might have been less. At this time, the city was totally mismanaged, and it brought forth a significant figure into the mix. This man, we mentioned him before. His name's Theramenes, and he was pretty much outraged by the actions of this regime. He was a big critic of this, and he was more of an advocate of a more inclusive and consensual government, basically what the Athenians had prior. And he was a threat to the regime because of if he won supporters, basically. Like if you win supporters, if you win the majority of the citizens, and keep in mind the citizens at this time are most likely probably armed. And also, basically, they responded to his critics by making a new branch of government consisting of 3,000 citizens. It's hard to say if they were actually planning to do this, like they most likely had this in the works, but just really put it out there. And they also had the names of those, so it gives more credence to that. But there are many also criticized this move, basically for the following reasons. It restricted it to only 3,000 citizens. Once again, he's arguing for a consensual government. It was also a conflicting branch, and also how the regime would be undermined by this new 3,000. But these criticisms were not taken as serious. It might be because of the man's reputation at the time. And you can say he's sort of a radical of some sort if you consider the, the time period he lived in. And also, well, while all this is going on, the 30 tyrants are settling the conflicts with Thrasybulus, and this whole conflict is basically about the exiles, and it's something that's not really worth getting into. But if you want to read about this is covered by Xenophon in his Hellenica, which is just a continuation of Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian War. The reliability has been questioned by multiple scholars. Keep that in mind, but the way with these ancient texts work, you have to realize that everybody has a narrative, and just because that is a thing, you should not really totally question the validity. But that's another topic. I really might make a video about that because it drives me insane that I see so many people give too much of a bad name for Xenophon. But anyhow, the significance of this is basically that the 30 and the 10 defeated Thrasybulus and his exiles, and this led to the citizens being disarmed, and Theramenes was finally executed. They accomplished this by presenting laws to the bully, and they basically forced them to pass them. So they could pretty much kill Theramenes legally. And these laws were basically that the 30 could execute anybody not on the list of the 3,000, and deprive the rights of individuals who took part in the fall of the previous regime. And Theramenes was guilty of both accounts. And so, off with his head, pretty much. That's the end of that. And also, they would disarm the citizens involved in the fall of the last oligarchy regime, and it led to this regime abusing their power even further. The 30 and the 10 were eventually defeated by the exiles of Pyle, and they were disposed of. Eventually, the Athenians elected another 10 citizens, but don't worry, this actually ends well for once. And the reason they elect, oh wait, no, no, it does not end well. Um, I forgot, this is not the part. It's after this part. So yes, these 10 citizens that were elected for the purpose of putting an end to the war, and this was not done at all. These new 10 feared what could happen and started acting cruelly towards the citizens. To set an example, these new tyrants basically to further strengthen their support. They asked support from the Spartans who were interested in keeping the Athenians unstable and had the back, and basically gave these people the backing in the ways of a garrison. And with this constant conflict, eventually the resistance of the group that held the Pariahs. Oh yes, I forgot to mention the exiles weren't totally defeated. There were still some of them, and they got their hand on the Pariahs and the Mudicea. And I don't really feel like explaining the geography of Athens right now. But anyways, they ended up getting the upper hand, and they had people come to their side eventually. And this led to the disposal of the newly 10 tyrants who were elected, and they chose another 10 men with the great reputation of being good citizens. But don't worry, this one actually goes well, because at long last, democracy was restored. And the history of Greece was really so complicated in the 5th century BCE, man. Like, these Greeks back then were always fighting and always like inner conflicts, even within their own cities. It's just insane. It's a headache, really, but it's an enjoyable read. And also, the resistance group that holding the Pariahs and Munichia eventually came to terms with these new leaders, and it ended with the exiles returning, which is what these people wanted all along. After these conflicts, the final changes to the constitution at the time of Aristotle was made and put into effect. At the time, Aristotle tells us there were 11 changes to the Athenian constitution, which we have covered in this entire series. And so, to conclude this video, with the history of Athens' constitution out of the way, we can finally discuss the actual constitution of Athens. It will be lengthy, I admit, but I generally think we can succeed in covering it. This has been the history of Athens' constitution in a nutshell. And well, we can finally get to the meat and bones of this actual series. So I look forward to speaking to you all in the next video. I don't have no posting schedule at the moment, like I said, especially when it comes to these long projects. But yeah, if you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. Share the video, helps the channel grow and get this information out there. And if you wish to correct me, well, you're free to do so. After all, you should not trust everything you see on the internet or hear. Keep that in mind. But anyways, that has been all, and see you.